This video is made possible by our sponsors, AJA. We'd like to thank AJA for all their support and tell you to go to aja.com for all your production and post-production needs. Hi, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com, or of course, follow us on Instagram at filmmaker_u. Every week, we interview film professionals to discuss their work, and this week I'm joined by Ryan Spears and Christopher Salerno, the SNL editing team behind the Emmy-nominated Mario Kart trailer with Pedro Pascal. Welcome to the show, guys.
Hey, thanks for having us.
I guess my first question for you guys is, we hear the typical week for the cast a lot, but we don't know the typical week for some of the various crews. So like when you're given a short like this, a digital short, what's your typical week look like on a project like this?
It's a little shorter even than what the writers and the cast do, because we, follow their lead. They write on Tuesday into Wednesday morning. They do the read-throughs on Wednesday, and then on Wednesday night is when they pick the scripts that are going to go into production that week for the live show and for the pre-tapes. So we are finding out what our pieces are on Wednesday night. We usually join a production meeting that happens Wednesday night, sometimes at 10 or 11 o'clock at night on a Zoom. And then we just kind of roll into it. For us, our weeks typically just kind of consist of a Friday and Saturday, with the Thursday as kind of a prep day for us. So, that gives us time to kind of review the script as we're getting rewrites, start pulling music and sound design, start kind of like coming up with instructions for our assistant editors. And then really things kind of start going quickly on Friday. They'll shoot, usually during the day on Friday. Sometimes they'll actually shoot overnight, Friday into Saturday. So we're in at 30 Rock on Friday, getting footage as they are wrapping cards on set. So we're getting stuff as they're still shooting. Our assistant editors are breaking it out for us, and we're starting to cut while the shoot is still going on. We work through till typically 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, depending on how intensive the sketch is, how late they shot. We go get a little bit of rest, and then come back at around 10 in the morning, and then it's pretty much a sprint from 10 in the morning until our delivery times, which vary depending on when the sketch is in the show. And we have kind of an earlier finish line for dress rehearsal, which for the show is 8 o'clock. And then from dress rehearsal, we do some revisions on the sketch, either graphics that haven't kind of been fully polished yet, or based on the response from the audience at the dress rehearsal, we'll make trims, swap out jokes, things like that. So
yeah, and just to add to that, as far as like the shooting schedules on Friday, it's totally dependent on the cast availability, which is obviously limited considering there's 3 pre-tapes going on and also rehearsal for the live part of the show. So there will be times where we'll shoot, sometimes Friday night, overnight, and early Saturday morning, which just pushes, our schedule a little bit later, even though we have the same finish line. So like Ryan said, a lot of time we'll come in the afternoon and, end early in the morning and then come back Saturday. But there are also times where we just kind of have to cut our losses on Friday if it's too late, and just come in late into the night on Friday or early Saturday morning and just work through the show.
I grew up in a household in the projects in East Harlem. There's a program at WNET, the public television station, to get more people of color behind the camera, in the editing room, doing sound, writing scripts. When they put me in a dark room and they showed me how to use the splicer and the rewinds, I felt this big sigh of relief, this sense of, wow, I found my space. The editing part of filmmaking is the real nuts and bolts of what makes films come to life. You can ask Spielberg, you can ask Tarantino, you can ask Spike. When you sit here, this is where the proof is in the pudding. I'm Sam Pollard, and this is my class on documentary editing.
So how did you guys break up the work on this project?
Yeah, so typically the way that it's set up at the show is there are three film units for the show. Not every week are all three shooting. Sometimes one of them is dark, and the unit that Chris works on was actually dark that week. So that gave us the opportunity to bring him on to the edit because it was the film unit that was doing that piece, which is the unit that I work with. And he was able to help us with cutting together like the intro and kind of helping with extra sound design, helping coordinate with graphics, and also backing me up and also backing up, my fantastic first assistant editor, Noel Tar, who is in the room with me all day Friday, all day Saturday on the back machine, just kind of pulling things as needed, funneling stuff from our junior assistant editors to me, and doing a lot to coordinate with the graphics team and communicate changes from the writers and the directors directly to the graphics team, so I can kind of focus on the timeline. So with Chris involved, I was able to kind of pass things off to him as I was trying to focus on the main chunk of the edit. And Chris really kind of did the whole intro section for that piece, that kind of sets up the premise relating to The Last of Us.
Yeah, and we just so happened to be lucky that this week my unit was dark, because obviously the scope of this piece was probably the largest that I think the show has attempted. So, I think hopefully having me there, helped kind of spread the workload a little bit.
Well, that was going to be one of my questions, because like I rewatched it a couple times today, and I was like, there's a lot of visual effects in this. So what were the tools you used? What did you do in your systems versus handing off to a VFX team?
Well, as far as the VFX goes, this actually was a bit of a unique piece for us because they did decide on the script on, I believe, on Tuesday as opposed to Wednesday. This was something that Streeter Seidel and Mikey had been kind of kicking around for a while, and Pedro just wanted being the perfect host for it. I don't think that the Last of Us element was necessarily a big part of it yet. Mm-hmm. So they were able to decide that we're going to do this on Tuesday, which they didn't shoot it any earlier, but it gave both the set design team and, more importantly, the VFX team time to start building everything. So they built all these environments and everything kind of going into Friday. They already had a head start. And then Mike Diva, the director, shot an animatic for the racing sequence that we followed pretty closely. So, I mean, pretty much everything VFX wise in there went through VFX. I mean, we were doing loose keys sometimes on things, but ultimately that would go back through VFX to get cleaned up and everything. And we were just trying to when I started cutting it, the first pass at the race sequence was literally me cutting together the storyboard essentially that Mike Diva had shot. So it's like him in an office chair doing the driving and stuff like that, and little like Matchbox cars and stuff like that. So, and then as footage comes in, I'm replacing that. So that's stuff on green, and then we start getting the early like renders of things and replacing that, and then kind of just upgrading them as we go through the day. So a lot of that really ran through VFX. So that's another big task with these projects, is to kind of coordinate all that and make sure it all gets in, which is something that like Noel helps a lot with too, is kind of like, he is constantly trying to copy the latest version of my sequence and laying in the latest versions of the graphics if I'm still kind of like focused on the edit.
Yeah, and Mike Diva being the director, he's a very VFX conscious and savvy director. So there was a lot of planning that went into the shooting of it, to make sure that the VFX job in post would go smooth. And there were also a couple VFX artists on set to make sure that things were shot in a way that would allow them to do their job in the short amount of time they had. And then like Ryan said, like right up to the end, you're basically getting new renders up until the finish line.
Mm-hmm.
How close were you for the finish line? Have you ever gone right up to like 11 o'clock, or is it always
we go past 11 o'clock frequently. So we back time about I don't know. I think, Chris, it's roughly like 10 to 20 minutes from when our piece is slotted to air. About 20 minutes before that, we are supposed to output what we call a safety. So that the control room at least has something to air, even
Yeah.
if we're still kind of working on laying stuff in. And then in that 10 minutes, we have a 10-minute window to kind of keep trying to get them updated cuts. And then usually the drop dead is about 10 minutes before our air time. So yeah, with this one, we were definitely going right up to that. And occasionally there are small little things in the VFX that we want to do, little tweak that they just want to do little tiny bits of cleanup that we'll try to slot in afterwards. But, I mean, pretty much what we export for the air show is that's it.
Now, because you said that you, at the dress rehearsal, you sometimes get notes back. Did anything change in this from dress rehearsal to air?
Yeah, this one, I think the biggest thing that changed between dress rehearsal and air was we were sort of working in collaboration with Eli Brueggemann, who is the show's kind of like, he's one of the show's composers. He does a lot of stuff for the live show, and occasionally he'll do stuff for us for pre-tapes. We were working on trying to get a score together with him, but it's a constantly moving target with the cut and everything like that. So we went to dress with kind of a rougher version of his score. So we got a better version of that for air. And then the racing scene for dress was very, very loose. Like it was, because we just had the previs and we had early renders, and it's kind of hard to like get the pacing down exact with that. So after dress, we went through, and I think we probably cut about 20 seconds from the racing sequence, just like really tightening it up, making those like, action moments hit and everything. And then I think we trimmed a little bit from the opening section as well. But this one was really just some like tightening and condensing and polishing between dress and air. Sometimes we do bigger retools between dress and air, which can be a bit of a mad dash. But this one, being the beast that it was, we kind of knew like, okay, first of all, I mean, it played great during dress. And then it was just kind of like, how can we, just enhance this and just make it really clean and everything. So. Yeah.
And not specifically for this one, but a lot of times, those dress to air notes will be based on the reaction of the dress audience. There are times where a joke might just not land, or it might just miss a little bit. And, the writers will find ways to try to either, condense jokes or, even sometimes swap them out with alts. But it's usually very dependent on how the dress audience reacts to the cut.
So what, were there any jokes that you really liked, but for whatever reason, maybe the directors didn't want it, or it just didn't fit the scenes or anything like that you had to cut out of this? Because you're working with like some of the funniest people on earth right now. And I'm sure they gave you a lot.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, this one, I'm trying to remember. There was some good stuff. We had some good stuff with Keenan that we ultimately kind of trimmed out because it just kind of slowed down the pace for the edit. We kind of were going to him as this like villain character, but it just sort of took away from where we were going. And, I think we just kind of wanted to get where we were going a little bit faster. So we had to lose some of that stuff. But a lot of what was good is in this piece. And, it's so, again, I think going into this one, it's so, was so like VFX heavy, that they were relatively close to the script in the shoot. Occasionally there's definitely things that are a little bit more ad-libby, that they improvise more on set, come up with some new dialogue, and the writers come up with new ideas on set that we'll get, and then we kind of have a bunch of different alts, or they'll write a bunch of alts into a script. Those I think are the pieces that tend to have bits where it's like, I really like that joke, but it just wasn't working.
Yeah, and I think like going back to what you said about just the talent of the cast, it's like almost a double-edged sword, because on one hand, we can put together a cut and use pretty much any take and it'll be great and it'll be hilarious. But on the other hand, it's as an editor, you sometimes don't want too many choices. And sometimes you just look through the takes and every single take is funny, and it becomes, yeah, a little bit of, what does the audience react to most? What does the room react to best? And just kind of like, sometimes you also just have to go back to the basic of what the intention of the script is, and just, make sure you're sticking to the intention.
Ryan, you kind of alluded to this earlier, like the VFX coming in sort of impacts your pacing a bit, right? Because you don't have, when you're working with the animatics and what have you, you're working with sort of guessing of how long things are going to be or what it's going to look like. So how did you tackle that situation when you have such a tight deadline, trying to get things to work fluidly when you don't have everything?
I mean, it's kind of like building an airplane while you're already in the air in some ways, I mean, like, there's not always necessarily a one way to do it for us. And, there's so many things that we're trying to juggle. It's sometimes you just have to kind of like go with what you have time to do and what your gut tells you. So, I think the initial pass, I did leave a little like looser because I wanted to make sure we had enough like handles on things that we wouldn't have to go back and forth to get handles on stuff. And then, we decided to kind of make it a little looser to start with. And then once we got stuff in, we could really be like, okay, after this action, we can really get out of the shot. Like, we don't need to keep on it. And then we still have those handles at least. So like, if you do need to do anything to, if we need to add a little bit on a shot so that beat lines up properly with the score or something, we can still do that. So that's kind of like typically how I'll work. And like, our VFX lead for the film unit, Dave Eber, is there. So he's constantly able to come in and check in with the edit. And they all, for compositing, they're all on After Effects. So they can easily bring our projects into After Effects and kind of see where things are at.
Is that because you're on Premiere, so you're just sending them through? And
we don't do dynamic linking for the stuff back into the sequence, just because it starts to get messy, and we want to make sure that we have the right version and someone's not making a change in their After Effects project and affecting our timeline when we don't want that. But like, it does make it easy for them to just like open up our sequence and grab what they need and start working on it, rather than having to do more prep to get it into After Effects for them. So
why did you guys go with Premiere? Was it just that was the tool that was there when you got there, or is there
I think a lot of what Ryan said, which is compatibility with all the different the different parts of the team, specifically the VFX team, but also it has a lot to do with just the speed at which we work and the speed at which we need to start. There's really no other program that I feel like you can start as quickly. We can take the footage straight from the camera, upload it, and just start editing within minutes, as opposed to transcoding and all that. And we do occasionally transcode, but even then it's just such a simple linking process. And then it's, and then at the end of the edit on Saturday, there's the finishing that still has to happen, because these are they're colored and they're mixed, and just to be able to prep and then, conform all within the sequence makes it pretty important for us, especially when you get down to the wire. And then another thing that we do is with these pieces, they're very heavily sound designed, and we don't have a sound design team or anything. So that's something the editors are pretty, responsible for. And in Premiere, it's just so easy, in my opinion, to pull in any sound, of any file type, and be able to, use something like the essential sound panel or just the different audio effects to place it easily and to do a real pretty complete sound design pass before we pass it off.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the speed of getting things in and out of Premiere for us is key, and the compatibility. I mean, we talked about, the exporting for the deadline and stuff, and it's like, we're often sitting there watching a Finder window that we have open where they're rendering out graphics, grabbing them as soon as they show up in there into Premiere, and then dragging them into the timeline. So, and that happens in seconds. Like, we don't have to wait for something to transcode. Sometimes little mistakes are made when things are rendered and like they're 1080 or they're 4K. They don't match whatever the sequence is. But we don't have to worry about that because we can just still bring it in and get it right, the right size, just so we have something we can deliver, so
Yeah.
it gives us that flexibility.
Interesting. Now I have one last question for you guys. What would you say is your favorite guilty pleasure film or TV show to watch?
That's a good question.
I think one of
My
my
gotcha
favorite
question.
guilty pleasure films is A Talking Cat, which
What's
is
that one about?
classic.
I'm assuming it's about a talking cat, but what is?
Yes, it's a classic like bad movie. Eric Roberts plays the voice of the cat. All the cat talking looks like it was just a little black box someone added and After Effects, kind of just doing this. And the acting is terrible. The sets are terrible. It's probably like the most Room level like movie I've seen besides The Room.
You're gonna have to check that one out then.
Yeah.
How about yourself, Chris?
Because it's not that guilty, but a lot of the old 90s, like Adam Sandler type comedies are comedies I always end up going back to. And, something like, Billy Madison's one of my favorite movies of all time. And, I'm not that guilty about it, but, but I think it's set the tone for, for what comedy was then and kind of how it still is.
Wow. So I guess when Adam Sandler showed up for a year or two ago, were you excited to?
Oh yeah, that was a crazy starstruck moment for sure.
Well, thank you guys for allowing me to interview you today.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
And that's it for this week, everyone. Make sure to check us out at filmmakeru.com or, of course, on Instagram at filmmaker_u. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching. This video is made possible by our sponsors, AJA. We'd like to thank AJA for all their support and tell you to go to aja.com for all your production and post-production needs.